Let us pray. Father, be present with us as we come together to learn and to listen and to be part of the journey of faith. We ask that you give us wisdom and guidance in this journey so that one day we may share with you in the glorious resurrection that you have promised every one of us at the end of our journey. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Amen. All right, tonight we're going to do something a little bit different. Instead of bringing in all these outside experts to educate us and to stimulate our souls and our minds, we've decided to bring our in-house experts to you to stimulate your souls and your minds.
Knock it off, Patrick. Knock it off.
What we wanted to do tonight was have each of the pastors talk to you a little bit about their spiritual journey, knowing that each is different from yours. But hopefully, as part of listening to each of our journeys, that you might begin to recognize some signs within your own life, in some ways that you're on the same journey, all of us, just maybe in slightly different places, maybe a slightly different path, but we all have the same goal. And hopefully, as we share tonight, you'll understand us a little better, and then we'll give some time at the end. We're going to try. Now, this is going to be hard. Each pastor is going to get 10 minutes. So, Barbara, in 10 minutes after the first one speaks, raise your hand, and they'll know that that's the 10-minute sign. Barbara's the timekeeper.
You're almost done with yours now.
Yep, good. I'm off the hook. Then we'll open up to some questions toward the end so that you can ask us some questions about our journey or share something about your own journey. And tonight is a kind of a spiritual night, prayer. We're going to go in reverse order of seniority within the Columbia community. And so Chaplain Dione has been here the least amount of time, and so she gets to go first. I have been here the longest, so I get to go last.
Yeah, they came up with that while I was out of the room.
Yes, right. That was Beth.
No, that was Mary Ann.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, if you can't, wave your arms, kind of like she will in 10 minutes. So we weren't given any kind of parameters here, so I'm just going to hit a few highlights and hopefully take quite a bit less than 10 minutes, and then leave some room open for you to ask me a question or two before we go on to the next person. We're asked to talk about our faith journey and our call to ministry. And I would say that my call to ministry began when I was 10 months old and was baptized. And in my faith tradition, baptism serves as kind of a call to ministry. So in that sense, we're part of the priesthood of all believers. When I was 12 years old, although I had heard the two great commands before, it hit me like I had never heard them before, or in a new way. To love God and to love our neighbors as ourselves. And that became sort of my life's mission. When I was 16, I began to pray this basic prayer over and over again, and did that for years. God, I love you, you love me, use me. Whatever it is that you want from me in this life, whatever you want me to do, you tell me and I'll do my best. And I prayed that prayer for about 8 years, and I thought I had the answer to that prayer for the first time in that 8 years. I had taken a course, my undergraduate degree is in organizational management. And in a management of small groups course, we took about 25 of these personality type indicator tests. You know what I mean? Like where you kind of learn about yourself. And whenever they had the common professions for the different types, they would share those with us. Well, I began to notice that there were 4 that kept coming up, including minister. And every time I would look at that list and I'd go, well, I know I'm never going to be a minister. So I looked into the other things and narrowed it down to, I checked off that one and 2 others, and I was working in the 4th one, and I thought, this is it. This is what God wants me to do in this life. And a few friends of mine went to seminary, and I was fascinated with what they were learning, so I decided I wanted to take a class. Yeah. So one thing led to another, and within a number of months, between looking into taking one seminary class and going to seminary, I was going to seminary in a matter of months. So rented out my house, gave away most of my stuff, and moved 2,000 miles away from all of my family and friends to go to seminary. Big life change. I had, up until moving to Pennsylvania to go to the Gettysburg Seminary, Lutheran Seminary, I lived in Colorado for most of my life. And before that, Fargo, North Dakota.
Geez, no wonder you went to seminary. Any place else.
It's a very lovely place.
Yeah, sure.
We have very lovely people. Just like everywhere I go, it seems. So I don't know how many minutes I have left. 5 minutes? Okay. So questions? What else do you want to hear? Yes, Mary.
Did your ministry change when you got married?
Did my ministry change when I got married? Yes. I started seminary in 1995. Met my husband that fall. It was my first year in seminary and his last year in seminary. And so that following May, on Friday he graduated, and on Sunday we got married. And after a short trip to Colorado to introduce him to my family and friends, we moved back here and moved into the dorm room at the Lehigh Valley Hospital where I was doing my chaplaincy training program, CPE. So yeah, my life kind of took a whole different turn at that point, and my life's ministry had already taken a turn from thinking that God was calling me to be a Christian witness in the corporate executive world to feeling called to be a pastor. Was a huge change, and then all of a sudden, now I'm going to be a pastor's wife too, part of a clergy couple, and it was all very different. What else?
Do you have a family?
Yes, I have a family. Of course, my husband. We got married in '96, so we've been married 17 years, and we have 2 girls. Some of you have met them, Kaylee and Maya. They're 7 and 9. Kaylee's 9 and Maya is 7. Sorry. Is that what you meant by family?
What were you doing before you came here?
Before I came to St. John's Her Estate as the chaplain here for those of you who don't know, I started here as the chaplain last March. And before that, I was serving as a parish pastor for 13 years at Christ Lutheran Church in Shrewsbury. How many minutes do we have left now? 2. Okay, you want me to just move it on to the next person? Any other questions?
You can add your minutes to Mary.
Okay.
Good evening. I am the pastor at St. John's down the
road here in Columbia. I come here having served 9 years in my first call in Warren, Pennsylvania, where the phrase lake effect snow is a 4-letter word. I don't care how you spell it, I'm telling you. But I came to seminary from Central Florida, which is still what I call home. My mother still lives there, as does my brother and his 2 children, and he is 2 years younger than me, and he has 5 grandchildren. I have an 8-year-old, so clearly. Came to seminary, to Gettysburg, as a divorced woman, grew up. My first 13 years I spent in upstate New York. My parents had 3 children. I am the middle child. All 3 of us were brought to the baptismal font as infants in a Catholic church. My parents divorced before I was old enough to have memories of my father living with us. And both of them, this is in the early 70s, felt rejected by the Roman Catholic Church. And in response, neither of them continued going to church. My only memories of church from my childhood are connected to my grandfather, who was a devout Presbyterian who sang in the church choir in a church where the choir loft was up behind the altar, so that when we sat in the congregation, there was Papa up there singing, just, he was singing just for us. He was a big man with a lap big enough to hold all of his grandchildren at the same time, thanks in part to the big lazy boy he had. And Christmas Eve every year he would pull out he had a black leather, I'm sure it was a King James version of the Bible, and he would read the Luke story of Jesus' birth straight from the Bible to all of us. He used to take us sledding. And one winter day, we were walking home from the park, and my grandmother had bought him a brand new coat. And we walked past a guy who didn't have a coat, and I watched my grandfather take his coat off and hand it to the man. I mean, he still remains one of my heroes in the faith for the way he lived. He got home, and my grandmother lit into him because he'd given away his brand new coat. But he was taking care of others. It's just who he was. When I was really in my late teens, early 20s, I met and started dating a young man who was Mormon. I started going to church with him and ended up joining that church, where I stayed actively involved there for, I think, about 15 years. And then I graduated from college, started teaching in a Catholic school. So every Friday I went to Catholic Mass with my kindergartners, and then every Sunday I would go to church with the Mormons. And it started to really mess with my, I had a lot of theological questions to ask, and took them first actually to the Catholic priest, who said to me, well, you were baptized Catholic, you're gonna always be Catholic, just give it up. I said, but what about it? I started asking him questions, and he just wasn't going to go there with me, and theologically I'm not Catholic. So I kind of set it aside and ended up, when I graduated from college, I'd also gotten married. My first husband decided he was going to go to seminary, so we moved away from home so that he could go to seminary in Columbus, Ohio. And while we were there, between his anger and abuse increasing and my faith crisis increasing, I was in quite a whirlwind. And was talking to one of his classmates one day, and his classmate said to me, has it occurred to you that the call to ministry is yours and not his? I wasn't even Lutheran yet still. I had, by that point, turned away from the Mormons, hadn't really kind of decided where I'd fit. And I was adamant, absolutely not. There is no way you're going to get me to be a pastor. I'm perfectly happy I was a teacher. I'm perfectly happy in the classroom. I'm good with this. Less than 24 hours later, I was having supper with another friend of mine, and she said, word for word, exactly the same thing. Has it ever occurred to you that this call to ministry is yours and not his? And at that point, I was questioning, and I had been talking for quite some time with the Lutheran pastor, had not been willing to take the step, but went and talked to him, and he said, just let it simmer. He said, if it's God's will, you'll know. And took me a few months before I finally took this step and joined his congregation, and just kind of let that go because I was dealing with a crisis in my marriage, and finally went to him one night and said, I have to leave. That was fed in part by a phone call with my very best friend who heard of the battle that we had had with my husband, who was at me that night with his fist here and his face here. And she said to me very wisely and very courageously, you need to leave before he destroys you. And you don't want to do that. Many of you will know how difficult it is to make that decision. But in the course of resolving that crisis, even the thought of a call to ministry just went by the wayside. I moved back to Florida, got a job teaching, was doing very well, was nominated for Teacher of the Year my last year in the classroom, and went about 6 months after I got settled to my pastor at my home church and said, you know, people have kind of said maybe I should be a pastor. I'm not really sure what to do with that. And he echoed the words that had been said to me by the pastor in Ohio. Just let it simmer. He said, if it's God's will, you'll know. And it was about 6 months later, I went to him and I said, I really have to do this. And he said, I wondered how long it would take you to figure it out. And then I said, no, that's really not what I wanted you to say. I was kind of hoping you'd tell me to let it simmer for a little longer. But then he helped me get the process started and journeyed with me. He still is one of the first people that I contact when I need a pastor for support and advice. He is now long retired, actually, but he cheered with me he rejoiced with me when I went home my first Christmas in seminary, having had, I think at that point, 4 dates with my husband. And he said, I said, well, we're just having fun. He said, 40-year-old men don't date just for fun. He's thinking long-term here. And our first date, our first date was Thanksgiving weekend. He proposed on March 15th. Labor Day weekend, we were married. We will celebrate 14 years married in September. We have a child, an 8-year-old boy, who is here, obviously, with us. He is at Park Elementary School. I was told at 22 years old I'd never have children. At 37 years old, we have a son. God is way full of more surprises than we ever imagined. And that's a lot in a nutshell. Questions from you?
Beth, your experience in the various traditions, how has that either enriched you or clarified for you where you are now?
My principal, he asked me how my experience with the various traditions feeds into who I am. My principal in the Catholic school used to call me ecumenism personified. I was married to a Lutheran, teaching in a Catholic school, attending the Mormon church on Sundays. With my grandparents, who I always tell people, for their generation, my grandmother would turn 100 if she were still alive today. It was a mixed marriage, the Catholic Presbyterian. That was really, for their families when they married, a huge issue. But for our families, it never was. They went their separate ways. Nana took the kids to church because that's what they had promised. All three of them, I think at some point after the divorce, my dad at some point was connected with a Presbyterian church as well. I don't know how actively involved he was. We lived with my mom. But I know a Presbyterian pastor was finally the one that did his funeral. My aunt is also now Presbyterian, so they both ended up what their grandfather was. My uncle ended up just within the last 4 years or so becoming Buddhist, so we have quite a mixed bag. My stepfather, people will tell you there's no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole. I'm here to tell you foxholes can create atheists. And he would tell you that because he used to say to us, if there was a God, that would not have happened. That war would not happen. I think I have a high tolerance for who people are as far as that goes. I mean, I think we're right Sorry, Patrick. I preach what I preach because I think, it's where my faith is. But I think God is bigger. This is how I always tell people, God is bigger and deeper and wider than any of us will ever comprehend. And it's not for me to decide that you're wrong.
Thank you, I got the emphasis.
I'm on time, so. I think it's you, Marianne.
Thank you.
I'm Mary Ann Kingsborough. I'm pastor at Concordia Lutheran Church in Columbia. When I was 9 years old, I remember I told my teacher at school, we had a project, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I wanted to be a missionary. I wanted to go to China because my favorite uncle was a missionary who had been in China. That's who I wanted to be, and she scoffed at me and she said, Mary Ann, you can't be that, you're a girl. And I countered, but I have an aunt who was a missionary in China. And she disagreed with me on that, even though I knew I had an aunt who had gone over there. But I really didn't think about becoming a pastor for many, many years. My father was a pastor, my grandfather, my uncles, my great-grandfather. I think I would run out of hands if I had to count the number of pastors in my family. And I married a pastor. When I was in college, I had started out nursing, and like many people do, I changed majors halfway through to psychology, and I wanted to become a therapist. And I can remember one of my professors in college, who was a devout atheist, telling me, you have to go to Pitt to get your master's and doctorate there. I said, I don't want to go to Pitt. That didn't seem right, and I was having problems in a couple of the courses trying to reconcile psychology with religion. Because a lot of my psychology professors were not religious people. They were agnostic or atheists. We went on a field trip to Gettysburg Seminary, of all places. And something happened when I went there. I thought, they have a counseling major. I wonder what would happen if I would go to seminary and get a counseling major. So I told my parents that's what I wanted to do. They were not happy, but moved in. My third week there, they dropped the counseling major. But I thought, well, I might as well stay. I was getting into my courses. They were really cool, and I had met this guy. Well, we ended up being engaged by that December, and I decided I would just get a Master of Arts in Christian Education. So I ended up doing that, graduated. We were married in that time, and kind of followed him around for the first couple years. I did some work with abuse victims and that type of thing. And then soon after my daughter was born in Lancaster, took a position as a Christian ed director at church. Now back then they had this thing called associates in ministry, where you're not ordained, you're like a lay person who is commissioned to serve in a church as a lay professional, they called it. So I did that for a number of years, but ran into a problem because I had all these evening meetings. My husband had all these evening meetings. We had these young kids, and we thought it would get better the older they got. Then it was running them to basketball games and ballet and this and that and this and that. So I ended up going on leave from call, and I became a bank teller for a couple of years. That got old very quickly. I still have dreams. I'm at the bank and my cash doesn't come out right. I have all this like play money they gave me, and I can't use this play. Well, never mind. Ended up getting a job at Lutheran Social Services in York County. We were living in York. part-time case management. Started out at 10 hours a week developing a program in the northern part of the county. I loved it, and I was there for, oh boy, 15, 16 years. And I had an office in her church, which is funny. But eventually I came to be supervisor of the program and covered all of York County. We had 4 or 5 offices in York, and then 2 in Adams County. And I loved it. I really did. Case management for a church agency is neat because you can help people regardless of their circumstance. They can make any kind of money or no money. But time went on, and that's a long time to stay in a helping profession like that. It truly is. But things were going well. My kids were getting older, teenagers. And on December 19th, 2005, it will be, what was it, 8 years ago. My husband suddenly died. He suffered a massive heart attack 5 days before Christmas. It was a Monday morning, and the kids had gone to school. I was there with him. Didn't know what was happening, because how many times do you witness someone having something like that? Paramedics came, but they called it the Widowmaker because it was so severe. The doctors reassured me, because I had to do CPR and everything, that even if it would have happened when he was on a treadmill doing one of those tests, they couldn't have saved him. That reassured me, because I thought, okay, it isn't something that I could have done something different. But when something like that happens, your life is turned upside down, truly. I had a 14-year-old and a 17-year-old. We lived in a parsonage. I had 2 months to stay in the parsonage, but I had to buy a house at probably the worst time in history in American society. But I found a house right across from the high school. My son settled on a college. My daughter continued, and life went on. One of the things I always said to people over the years, upon knowing that my husband and my father, everyone was a pastor, why don't you be a pastor? I'm like, oh, I could never preach, number one. Number two, I could never handle doing a funeral. I get too emotional. In the years I worked for LSS doing case management, I had to present a lot of speeches to United Way. So that became a viewpoint, getting up in front of people and talking. And then after my husband's funeral, suddenly getting through a funeral wasn't a concern anymore. Because when you've lived through one of the worst things that can happen to you, it didn't matter anymore. And I truly believed in the resurrection of the dead and life everlasting after that happened. And a funny thing happened. I became discontent even more with my work at Lutheran Social Services. And people started telling me, Mary Ann, have you ever considered? Have you ever thought? And then I did the most crazy thing I could ever do. I went back to seminary.
Absolutely the craziest thing.
My kids were both in college. I said, this is crazy. I did work part-time at hospice for Lutheran Social Services in Gettysburg, and I love that. I was a bereavement counselor, and I love that work. Really thought of myself as someone who could help congregations and people work through grief and tragedy and tragic stuff. And I went on internship. I didn't have to start from scratch because I had been to seminary before, but I had to take Greek and some of those pastor courses. Ended up becoming ordained, and my first call was served at St. John's, where Beth is now. I was there for a year as an interim pastor, and I really loved and enjoyed the people there. and was very surprised that I was called to a church just a couple miles away at Concordia. And I love the people there, and I've been very blessed and rewarded. And I look at how something that can seem so tragic can turn into something good. And I also look at how our lives change and twist and turn, but you'll always come back to God. Sometimes in new and surprising ways, but always back to Him. Any questions?
What are your children doing now?
Good question. My son is on internship. He's in seminary. He goes to Philly. We won't talk about that.
Why not? Let's talk about that.
He's engaged to be married this summer. I'm looking forward to a wedding on the beach, which is wonderful, and I love my future daughter-in-law as well. My daughter is a manager down at Walt Disney World, and she loves it. She loves it. She's on an internship now for a management position. As she said, she's a big girl now. Okay, thank you.
Oh, no, I was here 6 months before you, Mark.
Yeah, I know. Just a couple comments. I want to say I was fortunate enough to be on candidacy committee when Mary Ann came through, and I got to say, to this day, it's still one of the best interviews that I ever had the privilege to sit in, and I thought she was going to be a great pastor wherever she ended up. I'm just so glad you ended up in our conference and in our synod. And her son is going to be equally as, I think David is going to be a wonderful pastor as well. I can say that with the utmost confidence, because like I said, I've interviewed him, and I was down at seminary to interview him, and he's going to be a wonderful candidate. By the way, talking about being baptized Catholic, to remind you all that Pope Benedict was actually baptized Lutheran. So. I don't know. I guess he is Lutheran. And the Lutherans have it right. I will say I learned from our bishop recently that when he was in conference, he met a bishop from out of California or something like this who knows his good friend of Robert Schuller's. And Robert Schuller said that the Lutherans get it right. They actually get it. Their theology is the best that he's ever really studied or anything like that. But their problem is they just can't sell it. So we're working on that. We're working on that. My call to ministry is not a holy one. It's a struggle. It was resentment, it was hatred, it was everything that I didn't expect I would end up here. I did not like organized religion. I hated churches. As a musician, I was being asked to come in and sing at weddings and being ridiculed and judged and told to leave. The one was a pastor's wife who really, really read me the riot act. It was Saturday morning. I had played Friday night. I might have had a couple hours of sleep. I had red eyes. I was hungover. I didn't want to be there, so I just politely told her. I probably didn't say it like this. I probably said it a little more foul than that, but I just basically told her, you go tell the bride and groom that I'm not going to be here because you don't want me here. And then she went and found out that her husband, I didn't know at the time, her husband was the pastor, and he had allowed me to come in and sing. So I did a song that kind of like is part of my process, written by a friend of mine. And after I did the song, she ran across the parking lot. I remember her trailing after me in the parking lot to tell me how sorry she was. And I said, you really ought to consider the way you treat people when they come into your church. And it's an experience that stays with me as a pastor. When I talk about the gospel, I've experienced the gospel. in ways that a lot of Christian folks, my understanding of the gospel is it's out here. Forgiveness and grace is for us all. That's my understanding of it. But some people seem to hold that in their back pocket while they judge. And if they judge you worthy, then you can have the grace and the mercy. I grew up in Lancaster. My mother was originally from Columbia. Some of you know my family. Some of you know my mother's family. We went for a few years to Advent Lutheran Church in Lancaster, which was on the 900 block of East Orange Street, out eastern of Lancaster. They merged with St. Mark's and became Good Shepherd Lutheran Church out on Greenfield Road. Ted Schneider was the pastor there at that time. And I remember going to confirmation classes and being dropped off by my mom, and I'd head in the front door, and as soon as she would drive off, I'd take off out the back door because I had a friend who was a couple blocks away. Needless to say, I was not confirmed in the Lutheran Church. I was baptized very young. I don't remember it. And like I said, that was my understanding of church. And I resisted the church as I was on the road as a musician, of course. Not living a life that was very holy, and swimming home at 4, 5, 6 in the morning while my wife was at home. I would take care of the kids during the day, which was the best part of being a musician. Was I was the primary caregiver, because as soon as I would get home, my daughter, after she was born, she would wake up around 4 o'clock in the morning, and I would get up and take care of her. And then my wife could sleep because she was working during the day. And then when we had 2, my wife felt as though she missed out on the first one, so she would take care of it. But as she would go to work, I would take care of the kids during the day. Then when she would get home, I would take off wherever we were playing. And I experienced a couple different things. For one, we were looking for a song, and we were going around. We were in the middle of a recording project, and we were looking for a song. And a friend of mine who had left the bar scene, playing in clubs and bars, and I called him up. I said, Bob, I'm looking for some material. He said, come on up. He lived up in Mechanicsburg, and I was up there. And he said, let me play you this song. You guys probably have no interest in it. And at the time, he was writing all these Christian-based songs. And he played me this one particular song. And I was just knocked out by the song. It was just glory. It was just a beautiful song. I said, Bob, do you mind if we record this? And he says to me, yeah, but I don't want all that. I want to love you all night stuff in there. He said, I don't want you screaming and yelling. I said, no, we'll do it. We'll be fine with it. So the rest of the project was all this pretty heavy-duty rock and roll stuff, and then we come in with this nice acoustic piece. Well, as I would play that for people, they would respond to it, and the band responded to it like I didn't think they would respond to it, with respect. And I saw the respect that was getting. And so my cold heart was kind of melting a little bit toward my faith through the help of this person who wrote this song. And him and I would talk, and I would sort of like vent some of my anger, the judgment, and the harshness of what I had experienced as a musician. And he would kind of steer me and guide me a little bit, say, it's not that bad, you know. So my father-in-law experienced the Widowmaker. He was dead before he even hit the floor. Even if somebody would have been there, they wouldn't have been able to save him. And it was odd because it was on a Saturday night. Now, for 30 years I played professionally, and I can count on this hand how many Saturday nights I had off. You just didn't take a Saturday night off. That was your big money night. So we had a Saturday night off, and my wife and I went to the movies, and we come home, her mother called and said, your father just fell. So I took off out there, and he didn't fall. He was dead on the floor. And the reality of that was, there's got to be something more here. And thank God that I did have some understanding of the resurrection, some understanding of that. And I remember saying to my wife after that experience, you know, we understand this, but our kids don't. And I can't let my anger toward the church get in the way of this, because they need to understand it. And what they do with that, that's on them. But we need to take them to the church, and so that they get some understanding that this is not the final say. Death is not the final say in our life. So we started going to church, and you got to understand another thing too. When I got out of high school, this was the only thing I wanted to do. I wanted to go play music, which I basically did. And so when I got out of high school, they gave me my diploma, sort of like handed it to me and said, get out of here and don't come back and don't tell anybody we gave this to you. I was not a scholarly kid. I was not a bookworm or anything like that. I was the one on the railroad tracks every afternoon, getting high, then going to McDonald's and taking care of that kind of thing. But anyway, when we started going to church, my wife said, well, we went to Grace Lutheran in Lancaster when we were kids. I said, well, that's fine. I went to a Lutheran church too. I don't know if it has anything to do with it. Can we still go to this? Yeah, fine. So we go to the church. And the first Sunday there, I met a woman. I remember walking away from her, and I said to my wife, there's no way in hell somebody could be this nice at this early in the morning. There's no way this could happen. So we went again. I said, well, let's go next week. That was pretty interesting. Let's go again. It was like a ride on a roller coaster. I want to get back on, you know. So we went again, and she came up to us and remembered our names. And I said, she actually remembered our names. I was impressed by that. So I kept continuing to attend. And somebody came up to me and said, have you ever considered seminary? And I went to the pastor. I thought I'd done something wrong. And I said to the pastor, what is seminary? I honestly did not know. I honestly did not know. And he said, after he explained it to me, he said, is it something you would consider? I said, you gotta be kidding me. There's no way, no way. He said, no, I want you to think about this. So he says, do you have any college education? I said, well, see right here, we need to stop this discussion right now. This is not going any farther here. So I started doing some evening classes, and I was going to Millersville in the evening to get a college degree to go to seminary, while I was playing music full-time and working in a warehouse as well. Now, this is all wonderful, but you got to understand, my journey was not, I had the easy part. My life has been very blessed with a woman who kicked my butt royally and straightened me out, kept me in the straight and narrow a lot of times, picked me up out of the gutter many a times, and to this day still is my confidant, my good friend, and the love of my life. And I don't know where I'd be without my wife right now. And that is why I ended up going the whole way through seminary, the whole way through college, because of her encouragement. When I started saying about possibly doing this, people were saying, oh, you're not going to do this. And my wife was the only one that said, no, we can do this, Mark. We can get through this. So we did, and I ended up here, and you guys are stuck with me. I've been serving St. James now, going on 10 years, and I have to say, Columbia it's a great little borough. It's neat to get back and connect with some people and hear stories about my mother that I didn't even know. It was a wonderful experience at that time. But it has been wonderful to serve this borough, and especially the people of St. James, and this community as well. St. John, her estates, they got to put up with me every Thursday morning. It's fun. Thank you. I guess I can ask any questions. Good.
Yes, I just asked. I have 2 children, 30 and 27. My oldest teaches kindergarten in Lancaster, which is weird because she teaches kindergarten where I went to elementary school, and the place hasn't changed at all. Even the spot in the office where I used to be a lot. Anyway, my other daughter works for Dr. Strauss in Centerville as receptionist and is dental. she's the one who hands the tools to him. You do. My daughter's one of the ones that, Crosby, the one that sits in the, yeah, that's mine.
You just keep on mark for that.
You're darn right, that's the first question I'm asking.
She loves her daddy. Those two girls, they love their daddy. You forget, I was the primary caregiver, so I've warped my children.
We'll see. One thing that my spiritual journey and call to ministry has taught me is that God lacks a complete understanding of geometry. Because in geometry, you learn very quickly that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. And my spiritual journey and call to ministry has been anything but. Just a brief background, I'm the oldest of 10 children. Raised in a fairly strict Roman Catholic, Irish Roman Catholic background, family. My mother, who is not Irish, converted from being an atheist to a Roman Catholic so she could have her marriage in the church, which my father's mother insisted on. And she out-Irished Catholic my father by a mile. Baptized September 16th, 1946, St. Anthony's Church in Trent, New Jersey.
That's a long time ago.
My mother was only a month old then.
Darn right.
Close.
I'm 67 and a half and proud of it. Because I count every day as a blessing and every continuing birthday as another day on this earth. I am not eager to go anyplace.
Best game in town.
That's right. The good day is when you open your eyes and you see the sky.
Don't smell flowers and nobody's shoveling dirt.
That's right.
Don't hear organ music.
We went to Mass every Sunday, Catholic school for 12 years, survived all of the nuns, and I had only one lay teacher at 12 years of Catholic high school. Now you're lucky to get a nun in 12 years of Catholic school, but survived all of that, went to Mass almost every day in the schools that we attended, and knew in 7th grade, 6th grade, knew at that moment I wanted to be a priest. Maybe not for any of the good, right reasons like ministry and service and care and the gospel. It just looked exciting. All of the pageantry, all of the ceremonies, all of the stuff that went on every Sunday, the mystery. So much so that I memorized the entire service in Latin. Had not a clue what this was, what I was saying, but I memorized it. And my parents, for one Christmas, bought me a set of vestments. In those days, the Archdiocese of Philadelphia had a vocation week at the then Philadelphia Convention Center, in which all of the religious orders and priests and people were down there selling their wares, and you could buy little nun dolls, dressed up in all the different habits of the nuns and the priests. Now, yeah, all the time. Immaculate Heart of Mary, the IHMs. And they sold in one of the little brochures that they had that you could buy this little set of vestments, and they did. And so for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, I celebrated Mass every Sunday afternoon after we got back. Spent a fortune in Necco wafers and grabbed all the white ones for the hosts, and that was an experience. At 8th grade, I decided to go into the high school seminary, and I informed my parents, and my mother said, "No, you're not." And she said to me, "I want you to have a normal high school," because the high school seminary was, for Catholic priests, there were no girls. No dances, no
Should have gone to a
dates.
Lutheran seminary.
I know. We weren't local.
2 out of 3 of us, and then a Mary.
Yeah. So I went to high school and had a normal high school, and then immediately upon graduation from high school, went into a religious order seminary in Newburgh, New York, and the journey took me through their college seminary, their novitiate, which is a spiritual year completely locked away in the country. The first 6 months was up in Walden, New York, in the mountains, in which we never left the place for 6 months. Then we moved to Smyrna, Delaware. That was a place. No, it was Clayton, Delaware. I'm sorry, it's just north of Smyrna. Clayton, Delaware, for the last 6 months, and lived on a pig farm that the religious brothers ran. And again, you never left. You were supposed to be kind of in a monastery year to kind of get close to God. Went to their major seminary for the last 2 years of college, just did 1 year and decided that the religious order was not my cup of tea, and then joined the Archdiocese of Baltimore. I went to St. Mary's Seminary in Catonsville, Maryland, and then went to Catholic University for graduate studies and was ordained a priest in the Roman Catholic Church on May 25th, 1975. Served in 2 parishes, Holy Family in Randallstown. You knew the Catholics in Randallstown. They were the only ones with Christmas lights, because Randallstown is a heavily Jewish area, so they didn't have Christmas lights. Most exciting thing in Randallstown was our chief singer in the choir was Jewish. He taught in our Sunday school, our CCD. His wife was Roman Catholic, and she taught at the synagogue's bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah. And you walk into their house, and on the wall would be, at that time I guess it was Pope Paul VI. So you see this huge picture of the Pope, and right next to it would be the Chief Rabbi of the United States. They sent their kids.
Nora had Christmas lights on.
Yeah, they sent their kids to Catholic school, Sunday school, and to the Jewish synagogue school. They wanted their children to have a wide range. It was an exciting time. Went to St. Isaac Jogues, who, if you remember, was a Jesuit, like the current Bishop of Rome, and he was martyred in upstate New York, in Auriesville, New York. And I had one of the best pastors I've ever had in my life, and loved every minute of it. And I was planning to retire as a Roman Catholic priest until I just figured something was wrong. Just wasn't right. I didn't feel comfortable. And so I took a year off. In that year I met my wife, decided to, that felt right. I got married and started working for a bank, worked for 2 or 3 banks, the Pennsylvania Bankers Association for a while. And then when the banking consolidation happened, I went into the law firm business and ran law firms. And at one point when I was running a law firm in Philly, we were living in Baltimore, commuted all these places. Somebody said to me, what church do you go to? I said, well, we go to the Roman Catholic Church because my kids were in school. And they said, well, you know, you ought to think about it. Are you happy there? And I said, not really. It's getting to be tedious. Very, very tedious. And she said, well, why don't you try the Episcopal Church? So I went to St. Clement's in Philly, which I thought was a Catholic church because it was an Episcopal church, but they wore berettas and the cassocks and they had confessionals, and figured, no, that's just a little bit too close to home. We're not going there. So I went to an Episcopal church in Bel Air, Maryland, just outside where we lived. And the minute I walked through the doors, I knew I was home. Didn't know why till later, but I knew I was home. It just felt right. What I found out 4 or 5 years later is that my great-grandfather, Mark Peters, who came from Belfast, Ireland, was a member of the Church of Ireland. We were only Roman Catholics because he married an indentured servant on the main line in Philly, and all the kids had to be raised Catholic. And so my grandfather was Catholic, and he married a Catholic woman, and so that's the rest is history. But I found out why I felt at home. So I stayed and became an active member of the parish, and the rector said to me, you know, with your background, you could be an Episcopal priest easy. Well, it's not so easy, because the Archdiocese of Baltimore and the Episcopal Diocese of Maryland agreed many years ago that they would not accept clergy from each other's diocese. You couldn't leave the Episcopal Church to become a Roman Catholic priest. You couldn't leave the Roman Catholic priesthood in that area. So I came up to Central PA and met the bishop and joined St. John the Baptist in New York, commuted every Sunday to church from Bel Air, Maryland, and went through a discernment process thinking, I'm only going to do this part-time. Because you know, the Diocese of Central Pennsylvania has very small parishes. Many of them can only afford a part-time clergy. This is a weekend job. I was making great money at the law firm. First time we didn't have to worry about anything, I know. And weekends. But then this position in Columbia came open, and we made the leap of faith to become full-time pastor, and have spent 10 glorious years. This year, I am part-time at St. Paul's in Columbia, and I'm full-time running a law firm in Mechanicsburg. God doesn't know geometry. The shortest distance between my baptism and the kingdom of heaven is a straight line. And God said, I don't understand that. You're going to go all over the map. And so my journey has been one of all over the map. Spiritually, a difficult journey. I don't pray as much as I should. I hardly ever go on retreats because I can't stand them. I cannot stand being that close to God. It burns. And so I try to avoid them. But God has a way of keep nagging you and beating on you. I never wanted to leave the Roman Catholic priesthood, but I got a 2x4 to the face of the head. And once I was happy there, I never thought I'd come back until God said, you know, I need your attention. He hit me with a 2x4 and I came back. And I will be back until I die. It's not been a always pleasant journey, and I have been angry at God many times during that journey. I have, well, let's just say I have spoken some true Anglo-Saxon words to God when I have been angry at him for not making the path a little smoother and a little straighter. But I'm here, and I love every minute of it. I share Mark's comments about Columbia. I love Columbia. I love the people of St. Paul's. I love all of the people that I have met here at St. John Hers and the churches. We're a jewel that I think God has protected, and it's a great ministry. So that's about it. Any questions of any of us? Yeah.
How many children, how old are they?
Oh, I have 4 children, 3 of my own and Danelle's. We've been married 30, oh crap. Not a real year. 1980, 34 years, 34 this year. We have 3 children of our own, 31, 29, 27. And we have a 4th child who is really my brother's child that we have took legal custody of many years ago, and she's 26. I'm a very successful parent. None live at home. None live at home. They all have, they're all working. One is moving. We just found out last week. She called us and said, Matt and I, she's married, the youngest, my brothers, we're moving. We said, where are you moving to? Los Baños, California. When are you moving? February 2nd. We're packing the 6 cats, the dog, and a few other things in a car, and we're just moving to Los Baños, California. He works for Verizon and got a job out there. One's a Catholic school teacher, teaches 5th grade. It's St. Thomas Aquinas in Baltimore. The other is a software producer. If you ever go to the Rite Aid and they say you're too early for your prescription, you ever have that experience? You have to wait a day or two? It's her software that's telling you that. I'll give you her name and phone number. My son is working for Prudential Investment Advisors in Connecticut. He makes much more money than I have ever made in my entire life.
Good, they take care of you.
That's right. He just bought a house, and I've already picked out my room. See, really successful parents then live with their children. But
You hope.
it's in the will.
We keep telling our son, he has old parents, he better get a good job. When we go to parent-teacher conferences, we're often mistaken for grandparents.
Are there any questions that anybody has? Anything that anybody would like to add?
Yeah, I'm just gonna take
We
1
got
minute
questions
first.
back there.
Okay.
Is your ex-husband
I knew someone was going to ask that. No, he is not. He actually was denied his candidacy committee. We were from Florida. His candidacy committee, when they discovered that he was doing nothing to deal healthily with his anger, so extensively that his wife up and left him, they pulled all approval for him to continue with seminary. He has since, I've learned just recently, twice tried to get back into the process and twice been denied. I don't think he ever will. I suspect it's probably, I don't know this, but my suspicion is it's the same issue. I just want to say, I think, Patrick, you and I have something in common, and that is a powerful awareness that God doesn't let go of you. that God's action in baptism really, really is God's work. And once God's got a hold of you, you ain't getting out of it.
That's why
Anything?
Jeremiah is my favorite prophet, because that's exactly him.
I thought I saw another hand go up too. Was there another hand?
I think she was just
Okay.
adjusting the camera.
No, that wasn't her, it was something else. I just wanted to say, I kind of heard some threads through all of these stories. A twisty, windy path was one that I heard, and I suspect that your sacred stories, your stories of your calls to ministry in your life have also been twisty, windy roads. And I, for one, love to hear them. So when you're ready to share them, those of you who want to share them with me, or if you're pastor sitting up here and you want to share yours, God, we just love to hear those stories. Our call is specific, but it's just different. It's no more or less valuable than any other call to ministry that you all have had. Another thread that I heard is, and I didn't, because I was the first one and I didn't know how much you wanted me to blather on, but everybody after me shared in their sacred story, in their call to ministry, some pretty tough stuff. There's a lot of loss and grief and pain and regret. And I just want to point that out to you by way of saying, if your sacred story, your calls to ministry include those things, it's completely normal. And I think God works in and through the pain and the grief and the losses and the regret, and gives us opportunities each day for new life, and continually gives opportunities for new calls to ministry at every stage of life. So I just want to encourage you to continue to be open to whatever it is that God has in mind for you to do now.
How many of y'all feel like running to seminary right now?
When I graduated from Philadelphia, there was a woman, I think she was 80-something, graduated and was ordained, like 2 or 3 years before I got there. I forget her name. But yeah, so it's never off the table. It's never off the table.
What's that?
Anything else?
Was her name?
3 of us are Gettysburg alum, and then there's Mark.
But
Hold
I'd
a
like,
second, I gotta say,
Oh,
if you
God.
don't mind. True story. Do they need it? I got a big enough mouth, I don't know, I'll use it.
Okay. When I was considering seminary, my wife and I got in the car, we drove to Gettysburg just to see the campus and to tour the place. I got there and it was a gorgeous day driving out from Lancaster out to Gettysburg. It was beautiful. We were talked the whole way out. It was wonderful. We get out there, and by the time we were done there, we're driving home and we don't say a word to each other. Nothing. And the whole way I'm driving home saying, how do I tell my wife that this is not going to work for me? This is just not going to work. And she says, I don't see you fitting in out there. I said, no, it was too green and too quiet and too nice out there. It didn't work. So I talked to my pastor at the time, and he said, well, have you seen Philadelphia yet? I said, I've seen Philadelphia, I didn't see the seminary. He said, let's go down there and check that out. So we took the train into Philadelphia. Has anybody ever taken a train into Philadelphia? Please excuse this imagery, but if ever they give Philadelphia the anima, it's going right. The tube is right down that train line because you're seeing the bottom end of Philadelphia. And I said, this is where I've got to be. I just love the excitement of Philadelphia. I love the city, and I love, of course, playing in all the cities I played in. That's why I was most comfortable with it. It was loud. It was the diversity there was incredible. And I just really, that to me was like quiet and nice, and I was very comfortable there. A little edgy out of Gettysburg, so I thought this works for me, so I thought I'd end up down there. That's why I ended up in Philadelphia. No other choice other than that.
All right.
No, oh, okay, that's right, you're the one.
I think it would be most appropriate this evening, since the 5 of us exercise our ministry pretty publicly and pretty consistently every day, that we ask you to exercise your ministry this evening. So if you would all stand if you can. If you can't, don't worry about it. And I would ask you to extend your hands over the 5 of us and to bless us. That you extend your ministerial blessings upon us. And I've asked Vicar Jim to kind of help lead you in that blessing of the 5 of us. So if you would stand, please, if you can. If not, please remain seated. And extend your right hand over us, or both hands, however you would like to do that. And Jim?
As Father Peter says, many churches do this. They extend their hands in blessing for travel, for mercies, for all the rest of that. We thank you for the stories that you have shared today, for the griefs and the joys, for your service to your communities and to your families, and most of all, to our Lord and Savior God. We ask that the Lord bless you and yours. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank